Tiwanaku, the empire built on Lake Titicaca that vanished without an army. What if the greatest threat to a civilization isn't a rival army or a collapsing dynasty, but a lake that slowly stops flooding its own shores? That question is what the ruins around Lake Titicaca force us to answer. From roughly 500 to 1000 CE, a state called Tiwanaku dominated the southern Andes. Its core sat on the Bolivian Altiplano, just south of Lake Titicaca, at an elevation of nearly 3,850 meters above sea level. Tiwanaku's influence stretched far beyond its capital, into modern Peru to the northwest and Chile to the southwest. This was not a small regional chiefdom, it was a continental-scale Andean state projecting power across deserts and mountain ranges. At its peak, the Tiwanaku metropolis housed between 30,000 and 60,000 people, roughly the population of modern Santa Fe, New Mexico, sustained at an altitude where thin air and frost make conventional farming nearly impossible. The physical remains are staggering. The Gateway of the Sun, a single block of andesite carved with dense iconography, still stands at the site today. Scholars call Tiwanaku the mother culture of South America, a label that reflects its outsized influence on every Andean civilization that followed. Here is the central problem Tiwanaku had to solve. The Altiplano is brutal. Temperatures drop below freezing at night, even in summer. The growing season is short, the soil is waterlogged near the lake, and altitude cuts both oxygen and crop yields. Tiwanaku's answer was a technology called suka kollus, raised agricultural fields. Engineers built long rectangular platforms of earth elevated above the surrounding plain, separated by water-filled channels running between them like a grid of shallow canals. Those channels weren't just drainage ditches. During the day, the water absorbed solar heat. At night, that stored warmth radiated upward, creating a microclimate several degrees warmer than the surrounding plain, enough to shield crops from killing frosts. The channels also supported aquatic plants and fish, adding protein and organic matter. When periodically dredged, the channel sediment spread onto the raised beds as fertilizer. The system was self-renewing and productive at altitudes where nothing should grow at scale. The scale was extraordinary. Archaeologists have mapped tens of thousands of hectares of suka kollus across the Lake Titicaca basin. This wasn't subsistence farming, it was industrial-scale food production engineered to feed a city at altitudes that should be unfarmable. Backed by agricultural surplus, Tiwanaku built monumental architecture, the Acapana Pyramid, the Kalasasaya Platform, and the Pumapunku Complex, whose precisely cut stone blocks still confound engineers today. Surplus food meant surplus labor, and surplus labor built empires. Tiwanaku projected influence through religion and trade, not military conquest. Its distinctive iconography, the staff god, geometric sun motifs, appears on textiles, ceramics, and stone carvings from coastal Peru to the Chilean Atacama, hundreds of kilometers from the capital. This reach without armies is the first counterintuitive fact about Tiwanaku. Most ancient states of comparable scale expanded through military force. Tiwanaku expanded through economic integration and shared religious identity, a softer but no less effective form of power. New discoveries keep expanding the picture. The Palaspata Temple complex, excavated in the 2010s near Tiwanaku's core, revealed a formal ritual precinct covering roughly 1 hectare, including offering deposits of smashed ceremonial ceramics, indicating state-sponsored feasting at scale. That single find pushed estimates of Tiwanaku's administrative footprint significantly outward. Then, around 1000 CE, something went catastrophically wrong. Within roughly a century, the cities emptied. Monumental construction stopped. Trade networks dissolved. The state that had endured for 5 centuries simply ceased to exist. No conquering army caused this. The evidence comes from the lake itself. Scientists drilled sediment cores from Lake Titicaca's bed, long cylinders of compressed mud, pollen, and organic matter that record centuries of environmental change, layer by layer, like a geological diary. Those cores tell a precise story. At the depth corresponding to roughly 1000 CE, organic rich dark lake mud gives way to a pale, silt-heavy band, the unmistakable signature of a lake that shrank as rainfall declined across multiple decades. The data show a multi-decade drying period, not a single bad year, but a sustained regional drought that lowered Lake Titicaca's water level measurably. For a civilization whose entire food system depended on water flowing through thousands of kilometers of channels, this wasn't a manageable setback. Remember those suka kollus channels, the ones that stored solar heat, grew aquatic plants, and fertilized the raised beds? Without sufficient water to fill them, they were just ditches. The thermal buffering system that protected crops from frost stopped working entirely. The agricultural collapse wasn't gradual, it was a cascade. Crop failures reduced the food surplus. Without surplus, the labor force that maintained the fields and monuments couldn't be sustained. Without that labor, the state's organizational capacity dissolved. The city didn't fall, it emptied. The drought's reach was regional, not local. Paleoclimate records from across the Andes confirmed the drying struck the entire southern Altiplano simultaneously, meaning Tiwanaku's colonial outposts in Peru and Chile were also stressed, severing the resource flows the capital depended on. Archaeological survey data from the Tiwanaku core zone show a dramatic reduction in site occupation after 1000 CE. Settlement patterns that have persisted for centuries vanish from the record. The highland that Tiwanaku had made livable became largely depopulated within a generation. This is where a common misconception needs direct correction. Tiwanaku's collapse is sometimes described as the result of conquest, rival groups overrunning the capital. The archaeological record doesn't support that. There's no evidence of widespread burning, mass burial sites, or military destruction at the city. The monuments weren't torn down. The stones weren't burned. The city was abandoned, not sacked. That distinction matters, because it tells us that Tiwanaku's power wasn't military strength to be overcome. It was an ecological balance to be disrupted. Here is where the story gets unexpectedly modern. In the 1980s and 1990s, archaeologist Clark Erickson of the University of Pennsylvania, working alongside Aymara farming communities around Lake Titicaca, began reconstructing suka kollus using the original design principles. Reconstructed suka kollus in the Lake Titicaca basin produced potato yields significantly higher than conventional flat-field farming at the same altitude. A technology abandoned for 1,000 years, revived from archaeological evidence, outperformed modern alternatives in the same environment it was built for. The Inca, who rose to dominance beginning in the 15th century, expanded into a highland that Tiwanaku had already shaped and then abandoned. They inherited a depopulated landscape still bearing the physical infrastructure of a vanished state. The roads, the terraces, the iconographic vocabulary. The Inca explicitly acknowledged Tiwanaku as a place of origin and power in their own mythology. They didn't erase it, They incorporated it. Tiwanaku wasn't conquered by the Inca any more than it was conquered by anyone else. It had already dissolved 4 centuries before they arrived. Tiwanaku wasn't alone in this pattern. The 9th and 10th centuries CE saw climate-driven stress fracture states across the globe. The classic Maya collapse in Mesoamerica, the Tang dynasty's weakening in China, and the Abbasid Caliphate's agricultural crisis in the Fertile Crescent, where prolonged droughts strained the irrigation networks the Caliphate's tax revenues depended on. What Tiwanaku illustrates is a specific vulnerability, not a general principle. Archaeologists have mapped more than 80,000 hectares of suka kollus systems across the Titicaca basin, all of it engineered for one precise hydrological regime. When the drought dropped lake levels and drained the channels, that entire productive area went offline simultaneously. The system had no redundancy. Efficiency and fragility, it turns out, are often the same feature. That history now has direct modern relevance. The French Institute of Research for Development, IRD, along with collaborating Bolivian and Peruvian universities, has been using Lake Titicaca's sediment cores as a calibration baseline for 21st century precipitation models. Their work shows that the drought regime that ended Tiwanaku falls within the range of scenarios projected for the Altiplano under mid-century climate change. Tiwanaku's collapse isn't just ancient history, it's a stress test result for a system that may be tested again. Which is why the Suka Kolu revival programs that Clark Erickson helped launch aren't nostalgia, they're active climate adaptation. Communities around Lake Titicaca are rebuilding a 1,000-year-old technology precisely because it was designed for an environment that may grow more variable, not less. The most actionable thing Tiwanaku leaves us isn't a cautionary tale. It's a working blueprint, already in the ground, waiting to be scaled. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more.